Yeah. So this is the picture, the big picture. For those of you who were here last year,
can you speak up a little bit?
Speak up, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
You will have some repetition, because everything in the big picture hasn't changed. But something has changed, so I've tried to change a little and adapted a bit to the situation we face today. Actually, a lot of things change very fast these days. We are in a very difficult situation, a dangerous situation in our social and economic development. I must also admit that since I am a Norwegian, since I am a European, there will be some Eurocentric in my presentation, because I know more about Europe than the rest of the world, so you have to help me with the other things. I've tried to take in a little bit here and there, but some of my examples, I must admit, are European rather than international. What makes this situation so difficult and dangerous today is, I think, there is an enormous insecurity and uncertainty about the future. We see political rupture, unstable political and economic situations, enormous suffering, mass unemployment still growing, a concentration of wealth which is unprecedented in the history of humanity. We see a lot of misery, poverty, and if we add to this also war and warmongering, we have a sort of impression of what the situation is. It is great disorder under the heaven. So we live in very difficult and dangerous times, as I say. The economic, environmental, social and political crises are all very deep. There is no time any longer, in brackets, for illusions. If anybody was having an illusion that this is something that is going to go over by itself, or through negotiation, or through rational arguments with actors behind this development, it won't. There is just one thing that can stop the course we are on, to change it, and that is a mass mobilization of social forces. There is no other force which can stop what is going on now. Everything can be changed, however, and nothing is forever. We see also that today we see political parties go under. We see also new initiatives arise. We see political parties that has dominated the last 100 years disappear in 10, 20 years, like the Social Democratic Party in Greece, for example, which I think got 7% in the last election they had. So these kind of ruptures in the political and social construction is going on around us. And I think it is more relevant now than for a long time to say that we are facing a situation in which is either socialism or barbarism. And the barbarism is in the lead so far. But according to Mao, the situation is excellent. Because that was what Mao said. The great disorder under the heaven, the situation is excellent, he said. And you can say that if you have an enormous strong force, a mobilization of social forces with an ambition to take power, and then the crisis can be sort of an excellent opportunity to do exactly that. The question is, are we prepared? Is the trade union labor movement prepared to use this opportunity, this deep crisis, which is creating discontent, which is creating frustration among people and then open up the possibility to mobilize them for another solution. So far we haven't seen that. So far I think in Europe at least, but also in other parts of the world, we have seen the far right being more effective in exploiting that situation than the left. So that's quite a challenge to us. Okay, what I will try to do now is to focus on 5 particular issues. First of all, some words on, not on capitalism in general, but some things that I think is important to address when we talk about capitalism. The second is, what is it that gives workers power? Because if we want to challenge and meet this situation and confront these powers, we have to know how to build counter power. The third point is the political ideological crisis on the left, which is still deep and which makes it very difficult in the current situation. We see that also what is happening in the last couple of months in a number of countries. The fourth question is the usual question, what has to be done? But I've put on the fifth as well. To be honest, are we able to do what has to be done? And I will give you the full answer to that at the end of the course. No irony here? Okay. So, capitalism, which capitalism? I just want to address some few points, as I said. And one thing is that I see very often in the discussion, also on the left, they're talking about neoliberalism as the enemy. It is a neoliberal capitalism we are against, not the capitalism as such. So neoliberalism is seen as the source of all evils. And I think that's a wrong way of understanding it. If we don't understand that it is the capitalist system itself which creates the problems, I think we can come into some problems when we develop our own strategies and policies. Neoliberal ideology or neoliberal policy was not the cause of the crisis we face today. Quite the opposite. It was the ideology that was chosen by the capitalists after the crisis erupted. So it was the crisis, an internal contradiction of capitalism. It was the driving forces behind the crisis. But when that happened, neoliberalism was the policy which the capitalists themselves thought would best serve their interests. So there is no such thing in a way as the neoliberal capitalism. Neoliberal capitalism is the capitalism of today. Capitalism has a lot of different phases. And the phase we are in today is different from before, and it is different in different parts of the world as well. But it is the system which has to be changed, and not only the ideology. Another important point is that the reason why neoliberal policy or ideology did win sort of hegemony during very short time, during the 80s and 90s, neoliberal ideology had won hegemony all over the world, even long into the trade union and labor movement. And the social democratic parties, for example, also adopted quite a lot of this neoliberal ideology. And as I say, one of the reasons for that was that the labor movement itself was not able to come up with a fight against this. The resistance, the political, ideological resistance from the trade union and labor movement was not very strong. So there was a sort of capitulation. And that, I think, was because of the period before that, the labor and trade union movement has been depoliticized and de-radicalized by the previous development. So this crisis of capitalism is a sort of overproduction which is created by the internal development of capitalism itself. Capitalism has this enormous, forceful drive of it has to accumulate capital, accumulate. That is Moses and the prophets, said Marx, because it is the driving force behind the development of capitalism. If a capitalist is not able to turn some of the value added into new investment, it will lose on the market. That is. It's a very rough system, it's a hard system. You either play with the rules of capitalism or you are out of the market. So the capitalist crisis and all the disasters following what is developing in capitalism today is not a result of evil people or capitalists and so on. They haven't got a chance either. They do what they have to do, as long as capitalist system is the dominant system. So we have to focus on the system and not on the ideology only. So this overproduction is also a result of this internal contradiction. There are a lot of internal contradictions in capitalism. And they create crises again and again. And one of the contradiction is that the individual capitalist is trying to push the wages down, for example, in order to increase the profits. But if he does that, there is less money among people to buy the goods and services produced by the capitalist economy, and so the result is overproduction. Some call it underconsumption. But what was quite special in this last crisis, particularly in the USA and Europe, was that part of this loss of purchasing power was compensated for through increased loaning. So people loaned with the basis on their houses and other things, and it was very easy to get loans. And that was, as you remember, the reason why this crisis sort of exploded in the US in 2006 and became a worldwide financial crisis 2008. With speculation as one of the important elements in it. Here you can see this financialization of capitalism in a graphic figure. This dark blue ones is the sum of the financial assets at the global level from 1918 to 2006, and the other light blue is the gross national product globally, which has also increased in the period, but you see this enormous explosion of financial capital in this period, which resulted in what is called today the financialization of capitalism. And if we only read newspaper and listen to the news, we can, from time to time, get an impression that one of the problems we face in this world is a lack of money to invest, for example, in infrastructure, in public services, and so on and so on and so on. That's not true. It's not a lack of resources, not a lack of money. It's an overwhelming surplus of money. The problem is that to find areas in which this investment give profit. It is profitable investment that is the problem. Therefore, a lot of this financial capital is going into very, very suspect areas in the form of speculation and bubbles that is blown up, and so on and so on.
Where did you access your data for this?
I have to check it, but I don't remember now.
Okay, thank you.
I can find it. So what we have is an enormous surplus of capital, as I say, financial capital. And this surplus of capital is on a desperate hunt for profitable investments. That is the crisis we face. And the public sector has come forward as the biggest potential for these sort of investments, since the entire world was already conquered through imperialism in the century before that. So that is one of the most important reasons why public sector and privatization of public sector has become so important, because that is part of what financial capital see as part of the solution of the crisis they face. That if they are going to be able to open public sector for investment, that will solve a lot of this problem of this surplus capital. And that also resulted in this speculation, as I say, and this globalization, which many people talk about in a way in which it's almost so you think that globalization is a law of nature, just something that happens. It's a necessary new phase in the development of the economy and so on, but it isn't. The globalization, what they call globalization, is nothing more than the result of market deregulation and capital strategy for restructuring and expansion of capitalism. And it is most probably necessary in the current phase of capitalism, but it isn't a law of nature. But since those were the things I wanted to address when it comes to understanding capitalism. I think also maybe we should make some point on what anti-capitalism is. Because if you are going to be, a lot of people are anti-capitalists. I don't know why they are not socialists. Maybe they are. But they say they are anti-capitalists. There are movements that say they are anti-capitalists and so on. Well, there are different forms of anti-capitalism. There is anti-capitalism on the right as well. So anti-capitalism is not very clear what it is. So one thing is that in the political discussion on the left, or center-left, I would say, we have this discussion, we should regulate capitalism. And my answer is, we did that. We did regulate capitalism. Keynesianism, a civilized social partnership that we have had, at least in Europe in the post-war period, post-Second World War, the social dialogue that was established, the construction and development of the welfare state, that was all a result of regulated capitalism. Embedded capitalism, embedded liberalism, as it also was named. The thing is, it ended more or less in the 1970s. And we have to ask ourselves, why did it end, this regulated capitalism, in the 1970s? If we are strongly in favor of a regulated Keynesian capitalism, why did we lose it in the 1970s? At least we should have an answer to that. And my very short answer is that it didn't work any longer. The crisis of capitalism set aside this regulated capitalism. Regulated capitalism was in one way based on a very sort of stable economic development, not a crisis-ridden capitalism. So to try to go back to what we had lost, we lost it without being able to stop that, is a very, very strange strategy. So the golden age of capitalism, in a way, which this was called, ended in the 1970s. So, my view then, if we are going to be anti-capitalist today, we must aim at replacing capitalism with something else. And this something else, in my eyes, will hopefully then be something else with a human face. But we had capitalism with a human face. We had also experienced so-called socialism without the human face. So what we should go for now is an economic model with a human face. But this means that we have to go through a formidable struggle with very powerful vested interests. And that means to all of us and to you, it is all a question of power. Everything that we do and hope for and want to fight for in order to change the current development is linked to the question of power. And if we want to change anything, we have to mobilize social power. And we then should understand capitalism, because the capitalist class has concentrated enormous power, economic power, political power, also through the ownership of the means of production. That is the power base of the capitalist, and give them enormous power in society. And not only that, but they also have their interest or their private ownership of the means of production, that it's constitutionally protected in every country, capitalist country. What does that mean? That means also that the state is on the side of the capitalist. The state has at one of these most important tasks to protect the private ownership of the means of production. And I think it's important, because I've experienced many times in the trade union and labor movement, and people think that the state apparatus can be a sort of a neutral tool which any government can take control over and use when they are elected. It isn't like that. And we have seen one of the last examples, very illustrating examples, that is the Syriza government in Greece. They are in power, or I will call it, they are in powerlessness. They are in government, but they have no possibility at all under the existing balance of power to carry out a different policy than the neoliberal policy that the Troika has imposed on them. My problem is why they are sitting there. That's another question. But it is a fact, under the existing conditions, when after the Syriza government surrendered last summer, they became a puppet regime for the Troika to implement and further develop and strengthen the neoliberal restructuring of the Greek economy. So, the state is no neutral tool. The state in a capitalist society can have a sort of relative independence in some questions, but in the last resort, their aim is to protect capitalism and the private ownership. And they do it, if necessary, with police and military forces. And what we have seen many times during the history is that that they are willing to go very far in using the economic and physical power to protect those interests. That have we also seen. We saw it also in Greece. So if we have going to challenge these powerful, or this powerful system, we have to base that on another sort of power. Because workers do not have this enormous economic power that the capitalists have, do not have the control of the state apparatus in the same way as the capitalists have. So workers' power is more about numeric strength, the masses of people, the organizations, that means the trade unions, and the political parties which support and represent workers, the alliances we are able to build, and the strategies and tactics that we are able to develop. That is the basis for the strength of workers against the other side. So there's completely different power basis we have in this struggle. What is it then that gives workers this kind of power? I think it's what you are going to discuss here during the week. That is the key question. What is going to give us more power? Because we have to build power to meet this situation. So workers' power in practice is a number of things. First, of course, that we have the ability and the right to organize and to strike. And if we don't have it in the country, we have to take it in practice. That was what the workers did at the end of the 19th century. When they started to organize, to unionize, there was in very few countries they had the right to strike, the right to organize. It was taken in practice by doing it and by confronting the other side and then winning these confrontations. And that's what you have to do again if necessary. And of course all the rights which have been won over the last 150 years by the trade union and labour movement, which has given trade union rights and workers' rights, they give power. Permanent jobs and job protection give us power because it gives a security to people. It gives them ability to criticize things at the workplace, which they cannot do if they only have temporary work and so on. That is what actually these days, but this is changing very fast in many countries. Of course, strong trade unions, able and willing to fight, something of the most important in order to execute power from the workers' side. And political instruments, parties, able to represent the interests of workers and to lead the struggle. There are fewer and fewer of them, I must admit, but we need them. And at some stage we have to restructure and develop other policies. Some of the capitalists are very open and honest about the situation, like the US financial investor Warren Buffett, who said that there is a class war going on and my class is winning. And here is one of the effects of the winning struggle that they are involved in. You see here the wage share of the production in areas like the EU15, the USA, Japan, and Germany. So all over the world the wage share has gone down, and that means the profit share has gone up because that is linked to each other. Another thing which is quite interesting is this change from permanent jobs to temporary jobs. And I was surprised when I saw this first time, I must admit. We see here the dark blue, there are temporary contracts. How many of the young workers between 15 and 24 years have a job in these countries which is not permanent but which is a temporary contract. They can be sacked easily. And I was surprised to see that Sweden was on top in Europe. The example of the welfare state, if you remember. And Germany second, France third, and then Italy, the Netherlands, Austria, Belgium. In all these, between 1/3 and 60% of all jobs were now temporary. And that is quite a change from previous.
Sorry to interrupt you. You think that Great Britain would have got a lot higher now on that graph, since it says 2011 on the graphic now, after what this current government's been doing? I think Great Britain's number of temporary union skill workers would skyrocket. I think the amount of people on zero contracts is now
the explanation, Britain was specially explained in where I took these figures from, and they said the reason why it was so low in Britain was that the protection in ordinary jobs was so low they didn't need it.
That's why they look crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are these percentages?
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are percentages. These are also percentages of the decline of trade unions since 1980, from 1980 to 2010 in Europe. You see, we still have the Nordic countries at top. Denmark, Sweden are the two highest in the world, of course. On third is Belgium. All the three, they have a common characteristic, because all these three countries, Denmark, Sweden and Belgium, they have the trade unions administer the unemployment benefit in those countries. And that is one reason why they get more members than the trade unions in any other country. Norway is also a Nordic country, but this is not at the same height as Denmark and Sweden. We are down to about 52% today, but still one of the biggest in the world, without the unemployment benefit system inside the trade unions.
Sorry, go back on what you said a minute ago about ordinary jobs in the UK. I didn't understand that. What's an ordinary job?
Ordinary contract. So
the
permanent
full-time contract.
The full-time contract, the permanent contract, they do not give people much protection. They can be sacked anyway. But we see here that it's been a half in many countries. Ireland from 64 to 37, Britain 51-27, Italy 48-33. We have Austria here 57 to 28, Germany 35 to 19, and so on. So it's an enormous weakening of the trade union movement in Europe over those 30 years.
Just quick one, I mean, France is the lowest.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting and ironic in a way, because the image is that it's very strong trade union movement and it's very low membership, so I don't know if you understand that.
In one way, I think that France should not have been on this, because they are so different, completely different tradition. And when they go on strike, they say, "Come on, everybody." To le monde.
And they do.
And they go. And they have no support, financial support for people on strike, for example. In Norway, it's impossible to get people on strike if they don't get almost the full wage paid by the union. And that means we have enormous strike funds in the unions in Norway, but it means also that people are not very willing to fight if they lose through the fight.
For me, it's like people who are in the union are more like reps in the UK, so like union reps, and they represent people even if they are not in the union.
And France has also one of the highest coverage of collective agreements in Europe. So when they agree on an agreement in a company, everybody are covered by it, not only the union members. Okay. The third point, the political ideological crisis on the left. So, do you agree with me when I say that the labour movement is in crisis, politically and ideologically? I think the crisis is even quite deep. I think what I've experienced over many years, except from this summer school, is that system criticism is more or less non-existent. Few attempts at mobilizing for a power struggle. They can go into more limited struggles, but a broader more struggle, we have exceptions there also. There are no efforts to curb the power of financial capital. Very strange to me that the trade union movement had been so silent in one of the most important changes in capitalism that have led to the shift in the balance of power which it has. The labour movement is losing trust since it has supported the policy which led to the crisis. And I then think of the traditional social democratic organizations and trade unions and so on. But also left parties to the left of the social democrats, when they have gone into governments in Europe, it has more or less been a failure. They have lost support, enormous support, and they have ended up supporting privatization, supporting deregulation, even supporting wars in Iraq and so on. And then in order to explain to you what I'm coming to now, this social partnership ideology, which is so deeply rooted in the trade union labour movement in Europe, but also elsewhere, I know I have to take you through a 30-second quick course in the rise and fall of the welfare state. And it started like this. This is private capital, and what happened during the first phase of in the middle of the last century, when they started to regulate markets and to regulate capitalism, was that the left had greater influence. They introduced trade protectionism in order to protect their own capitalists. They introduced capital control in order to have better political control. They have introduced fixed exchange rates in order to avoid currency speculation. They introduced regulation of investments in the country. They have introduced labor legislation, and they used a lot of the money, the value added that came out of this system, into building a huge public sector. This was the political economy of the welfare state. Couldn't have been developed without this regulation. And what has happened during the 30 years after 1980? This. So there we are today. And that explains everything to me. That explains that the shift, enormous shift in the balance of power in society. Because this takes us back to the situation before they started to build the welfare state. So what we have today is reminiscence of the welfare that was built in the period before, but it is gradually being taken away from us. And that is going on. And it cannot be solved only by mobilizing against a single individual privatization. It has to happen through shifting the balance of power again, but to go further. Because what we have learned today, that this was just not enough. We did have this. We lost it. So what was missing? Why did we lose it? Because we didn't focus sufficiently on the ownership question, which gives the real power in this system. We didn't focus enough on democratic control of the economy, and we didn't focus enough on the necessity to mobilize social power to defend this. So this is the reason why the welfare state is being eroded in Europe today. So that was a 30-second course in the rise and fall of the welfare state. But the basis, the welfare state itself, and the class compromise which the welfare state was based on in Western Europe was the basis of the development of the social partnership ideology. And that is very, very strongly rooted in the labour movement. I know not only in Europe, I know also that the labour movement and the trade unions in Brazil was very interested in copying the welfare state when they took power through what was his name, Lula, and the same in South Africa when the ANC came to power in the 1990s, also very interested in copying the Nordic model, as I said. It can't be copied. No social model can be copied. Social models are developed on the basis of the forces and the power relations in each country. So they cannot easily be copied. So the preconditions have to be there. And this social partnership ideology is a true born child of the class compromise. But the class compromise was the result of a very specific historic development which cannot be copied by other countries, in which the balance of power shifted towards labor, actually, before they were able to be developing. And the capitalists felt the interest threatened and gave in to workers' demands to damp the radicalism. And the existence of everything from the Russian Revolution to the radical and strong trade unions in Western Europe was the reason why these states, these capitalists, accepted or built the welfare state in order to avoid something worse. And also the need for popular support among its own population in the Cold War against the Soviet Union contributed in the same direction within our countries in Western Europe. And we should also have in mind, particularly people here from the Third World, that the welfare state in Western Europe was also built on the exploitation of the Third World and the resources that they took out from there. So also, that means also the workers in Western Europe benefited from the imperialist policy of the European superpowers and the USA. We should be honest and open about that. But anyway, the result of this development, the class compromise and the social partnership, was 20 years of unprecedented social progress. So there is, it's not so strange to understand that a lot of workers and ordinary people in Europe was very satisfied with what they experienced, because to live through a period of 20, 30 years with gradual social progress was quite an experience. The problem was that the social progress that came in this period was less and less seen as a result of certain power relations in society and the previous ongoing class struggle. This was increasingly seen as a result of the social partnership practice. The compromise itself, social peace and social dialogue, was seen as the cause for social progress. It was a civilization of the capitalists, did the trade union leaders in Norway say about this. We civilized them, they say. But this contributed strongly to depoliticizing, de-radicalizing and demobilizing the working class and the trade unions, because they didn't have to do it. The social progress was there. And this also changed the character of social democracy from a class movement to a mediator between the classes. And that is, I think that is the main reason why the social democratic parties has come completely out of business these days. They developed into mediator, class mediator, and when the neoliberal offensive came, and when the employers withdrew from the class compromise, they had nothing to set up against that. And some of the social democrats themselves realized the reality. There is something called the Social Europe Journal, I don't know if you know it, but they also gave it a book a couple of years ago, and when they launched this book, they said, among other things, that in the last decade, European social democracy has ceased to be about either society or democracy. In government, it has embraced liberal economic principles that undermine solidarity and association. Along the way, the idea of common goods has been lost, and there is no vision of a good society. I think social democrats themselves wrote it. So, as Lenin, what has to be done? Is there an alternative solution to this disastrous development? Well, at least, and to follow Mao's thinking, the situation is excellent. The crisis gives an opportunity to disarm financial capital and regulate the markets. It is calling for it. The situation is calling for this kind of interventions, and it doesn't happen at all. And there is no mobilization on the left to take control of financial capital. The public sector should be used to damp the effect of the crisis and stabilize the economy. Instead of that, the opposite happens. Through the austerity policy, they cut and cut and cut and makes it impossible to use public sector. A radical redistribution of wealth is necessary because we have developed this enormous gap between the top and bottom. Only the trade union movement, is my statement, has the potential to push solutions in these directions in the current situation. But I underline potential. Potential is one thing, the ability and willingness to do it is something else, and the last is not there. And we need to discuss and focus on not only our demands and strategies and so on, but also agency. We have to develop our strategies and to consider agency. We need alternatives, but not without also considering agency. Who is going to carry out the struggles? Social forces, alliances, and so on. And particularly the new movements that has come up over the last few years, and the new political parties, which is very much middle-class based, have a lack of understanding of this question of agency. Who is going to carry that out? Where can we find the social forces with an interest and ability to mobilize and organize? And I say that wishful thinking and armchair theories, which we see a lot of, are easy to produce but quite useless. And this is all too little discussed on the left. And then we face the enormous problem of populism, right-wing populism and extremism. And that comes out, of course, because the capitalist crisis creates a real basis for alienation, exclusion, discontent and polarization. And this discontent that we see unfold in Europe over the last few years, and also come out in this Grexit and Brexit and Lexit discussions that we have. The problem with that situation is that it is almost only the right wing and the right extremists which give voice to this discontent. The left is hardly there. And if we are going to change this situation, the left has to take up and be a voice for this discontent. And the left hasn't been that, because the left has supported the construction of the European Union. Even though when the European Union changed character completely in the 1980s with the single market, and after that has become more and more reactionary, authoritarian, institutionalized, neoliberal state apparatus, the left has continued to support this, what they call social Europe and the peace project in Europe. And it isn't true. And the workers has left these parties because they do not represent them in practice. So that is the main answer, I think, of the current situation, whether you call it the one or the other exit. The extreme right on the other side support all discontent. That is, they are specialists in supporting every discontent in society. And they channel it in perverted political direction. We know that. The only alternative to that is a policy of the left which politicizes the discontent and channels this into a real fight for connected solutions, I think. So we need a strategy for the unions. We need to analyze the system and understand in Europe, the European Union, in other parts of the world, to understand the societies in which we live. We have to build new broad social alliances. Social bloc was what Gramsci called it. We have to develop concrete alternatives to the current development. And I think also trade unions, and that is part of your discussion this week also. Because of the party political misery today, I think trade unions must take a broader political responsibility. That does not mean that trade unions should be political parties, but it means that they take a more broad perspective than only the workplace problems. And we have to develop solidarity across all borders and to create democratic and action-oriented unions prepared for the confrontation which will come. So what about the new initiatives that we have seen? The short life of the Arab Spring, we all know the history of, but also maybe what I call the Latin American Spring, which seems to go towards an end as well. And I think that one of the reasons why some of these countries have gone so bad over the last period is that they didn't address really the question of power. They did introduce a lot of redistribution of wealth, but they did not take control of the production. And I think if we want to change society, we have to limit the power of capital, and that is the only way to do it. Movement like Social Forum, World Social Forum, European Social Forum, and so, Indignados, which led to the M15 in Spain, and that led further to Podemos, Occupy Wall Street, All the Summit, Nuit debout, which we see in Paris, in France for the time being, are all interesting developments. None of them have been able to live very long. So we have to follow them, but they are initiatives which people take in order to try to overcome the current situation. And then we have the political parties like Podemos and Syriza, and not time to go into it. New tendencies in old parties like Bernie Sanders in the Democratic Party in the US and Jeremy Corbyn in this country is also very interesting and important developments, not least because it's open for new discussions and legitimate new discussions in society. And the interesting thing, these old people are considered to stand as president in Norway because old people now are the people that attract young people. And the post-Greece movement, as I call them, democracy in Europe movement, Janos Varoufakis movement, Plan B, which is to sort of withdraw from the euro system. Lexit is exit to the left in Europe. I launched a new one called Sexit, which has nothing with sex to do, but it's an exit to socialism. So we go as a trade union movement is that we want emancipation, not another compromise which will give us some benefits in 10 or 20 years before they take us away from us again. Our aim is emancipation. The positive effects of a class compromise, as we experienced in the post-Second World War period, can never be more than a temporary achievement. Because when they consolidated and the trade union and labour movement has been weakened, they hit back, and when the crisis comes. And emancipatory social policies presupposes a huge shift in the balance of power in society. And today, I think, compared to what we need, we demand too little and accept too much. An authoritarian rule, as authoritarian rule and oppression increase, our response has to be bolder and more radical. If the right to strike, for example, is restricted or banned, trade unions have to win it back through taking it in practice. So my minimum program, so you don't have to work with that during this week, is that fight austerity, defend our public services, redistribute our wealth, let the rich pay, cancel public debt created by the financial crisis, socialize banks and financial institutions, defend democracy, break with trade and fiscal pacts, and unify the environment with the social struggle, organize, mobilize, and meet the confrontations. If we are able to fill that, we can summarize a very great development at the next year's summer school. And then my last point, which is, to be honest, are we able to do this?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Well, come on, I'm not going to give you any answer. Because that is what you're going to discuss the rest of the week here. But I can hint a little bit. And this also invites us to discuss not only successes but failure, and why did we fail. Dublin at least supported Greece in this period. There were strikes and demonstrations in Brussels a year ago. There were huge demonstrations in London against cuts and austerity. So things are happening. People are working on building unity, building movements, in order to be able to shift the balance of power, which we have to do if we are going to win this struggle. And we will. And that's a commercial. That's the reason why I've come. The reason why I've come here.
Copies are
To sell my
available.
book.
Copies are available.
Copies are available.
Yeah.
Thank you.